Hello everyone and welcome to the Silver Coder. I have a special episode today. I recently had the opportunity to sit down with the legendary Jim McKeeth, a person who has had a huge impact in the world of software development, particularly in the Delphi space. He served as chief developer advocate at Embarcadero Technologies, and he is now a director at GDK Software, where he continues to shape the future of software development. In our conversation, we explore his journey, from the first time he started programming, the advice he might give to his younger self, what we can learn from other languages, and much, much, much more. So, whether you're a seasoned programmer, a hobbyist, or just starting out, there's plenty in this video, plenty of inspiration. So, let's dive in and listen, shall we? Tell me, how did you get into software or writing software?
So when I was a kid, pretty young, my parents got us a Commodore VIC-20. So it was been in the 1980s, and man, we played a lot of games. First of all,
Hey, I did. So did I.
but the Commodore VIC-20, for those who aren't familiar with it, it opened up at a BASIC prompt. So you were writing BASIC. That's how you interacted with the computer. That's how you loaded stuff up, was with commands through through the command line, but you also were right there in BASIC as well. So it was just as easy to type load your game or to type a few lines of code and write code all at that point. And the ability to write code and just, have some thought in my head that I could then, type, move these keys around and have my thoughts materialize on the screen was intoxicating. And I was hooked. I knew right then and there that I wanted to work in software development. I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know what the career path would look like, but I knew I wanted to be programming computers. That's what I wanted to do with my life.
That would have been in the early 80s because I would have used an Amstrad back then.
Yeah, it would have been early 80s. I don't remember exactly when it was. I looked it up at one point, but yeah, it would have been probably early 80s.
Well, they had that. That would have been just before the 64?
Yeah, yep.
Okay. So you must. I'm not, without giving away ages. You must be just slightly older than me then.
Could be.
Well,
I was born in 73, so yeah.
Oh, shivers! You're younger than me.
Oh, really?
I'm born in 70.
Okay.
Yeah. So no, because like I said, I don't know if it was just because the Amstrad was I don't know if it was cheaper, to be honest, but everyone else had a Commodore 64, so trading games was a bit of a, didn't work. My son, and just as a quick tangent, my son these days, when they complain about the internet being slow and you're trying to load a game back then.
Yeah. Yep.
So, so you're wanting to get into computing started, from there then.
Yes. But actually, your comment about loading games, I just remember our Commodore VIC-20 had a tape drive.
Yes,
So it wasn't a floppy drive. It was a tape drive. And so it would take minutes to load a game from local storage.
Well, actually, just on that note, a friend had the game Zork on an Apple, and when it was loading, it said, go make a what's the effect of go make a coffee while I'm loading, so.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
So when did you, so other than the obvious about Delphi coming out in about 95, were you using Pascal before then, or?
Yes. So I did BASIC, and then I got moved into a PC. So I had Commodore VIC-20, Commodore 64, and then got a PC clone of some sort, and did some BASIC A on there, and then did some batch file programming as well, which was kind of interesting. And then remember when I discovered Turbo Pascal? There was a few other languages I touched a little bit, but then
Yeah.
when I discovered Turbo Pascal, it was just like such a huge leap forward. And I was doing a lot with that and did I used Turbo Pascal a lot and loved it. I used it for quite a bit, even after Windows came out as well. I didn't discover Delphi till Delphi 3 time period. I've
Okay.
used Delphi 1 and 2 since, but it was Delphi 3 was out when I discovered Delphi.
Yeah, no, I remember. I'm pretty certain I would have used the first version of Delphi. And there's a little story attached to that one. Did you ever do any C programming or?
Yeah, I've done a little C.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At university, we did the first two courses were Pascal and then C. This is in the very early 90s, by the way, before, let's say OO became, dare I say, big. So, and Delphi was as far as I was concerned, we were where I was working, they had problems with just using Paradox, for back-end queries on a, let's say, a system that was collecting live data. And it meant that we could have something that, and you didn't have to worry about the Paradox runtime, obviously, if you're going to do something Delphi-based. So it was a big change, to what you could do in Windows, without having to do the whole win main, and the message loop. It made things much easier.
Yeah. Well, and that was so I did a little bit of other stuff along the way into Delphi. But when I discovered Delphi, I would argue with people Delphi is better than everything. But then later on, I actually did and went and did a lot of other programming in other languages professionally as well. And when I did that, I discovered there's things I like about other programming languages. I think all of them have advantages and disadvantages. I found even when I was doing full-time other programming languages, I typically still liked Delphi for like side projects. And there's some things today that I will use other languages for because there's certain things that are more suited for certain applications, for sure. But I would say, and I've talked to a lot of people that have used Delphi over the years and then gone on to other languages as well, and they still like, man, Delphi was really nice. It is objectively as well as subjectively a great language. It has a lot of advantages. But one of the things I love about Delphi, and your comment about the main loop in C, is that in Delphi gives you this like higher level abstraction. If you want to, you can just drop components on the form and set properties and write very little code and do some really amazing stuff. But you also, because so much of Delphi is written in Delphi, right? You can write your own main loop, right? If you want to do that, you can do that in Delphi. You can reach down, like to say, reach down and grab the metal, by the throat and do exactly what you want to do with it, right? You can make your own memory manager. You can do everything in it. And so that's one of the things I love about it is that you do have this ability to move between the different layers of abstraction, and do what's appropriate for what you're trying to accomplish. Where, it was really common outside of the Delphi space when we had Microsoft, you had Visual C++ and Visual Basic, is that your Visual Basic developers would be doing like the bulk of the application, and then your Visual C++ developers would be writing components that the Visual Basic developers would consume, right? And so then you had to have two teams, one for the low level and one for the high level. And today, in a lot of other places, we see electrons. Like if people are building desktop applications, they're doing an electron. And I've talked to a number of people that run development teams, and they're like, yeah, we bought into the electron idea, but then we found we had to hire another team of C++ developers to write all the low-level stuff for the electron developers to use in their applications. And so that still continues, this idea that you need two separate teams, one low-level, one high-level, where Delphi lets you do all of it.
I think, in some respect, developers in general, they look at their language or the environment with rose-colored glasses on. Like I did a little bit of stuff on the, using now Swift and Xcode,
Mhm.
and I needed something, another component from GitHub to at least just get something working, because it was ultimately what it was doing. The little square device for taking charges, credit card transactions.
Right. Mhm.
But to make a long story short, the one component which I needed to, because I was inexperienced with on the Mac world at this point in time, but Xcode just broke and told me I needed to get a new version of it. And I think, to me, this shouldn't happen. And I'm thinking, and prior to that, I'm thinking that Apple has everything wonderful, and all environments have their own little pros and cons, and we only will evangelize the pros.
Yeah. Well, Apple. So talking about Apple, like occasionally talk to people that do Delphi development for iOS or Apple, and they're like, "Oh, it's such a pain to do the provisioning." I'm like, "It is." And Apple, it is a little bit better if you're just in the Apple ecosystem for that. But I've been at Apple or conferences just for iPhone developers and had people go up there and say, I would demo this, but my provisioning's broken and I can't deploy to my phone. So I'll just tell you about it instead. And so it is a headache for everybody. It's a little bit easier if you're just in the Apple ecosystem, but there's been a number of times also that I've been trying to do something like for Android and not getting able to do it in Delphi. And so I'm like, okay, I'll just write it in Java and then call it from Delphi. And I go to write it in Java and find out, oh no, it's the API is broken. It's not Delphi.
Oh.
So it is easy to have rose-colored glasses, but also easy to think that the problems that we encounter with Delphi are unique to Delphi, but unfortunately, they're not always the case.
Oh, look, they all have their own problems. So, with your in your role, with GDK now, it is GDK. I got that right.
Yes. Correct.
Do you do much software development now, given your role there, or do you just manage the underlings?
Actually, I do a lot more than I had in the past, probably. And I've done a lot of also like mentoring and code review type tasks too, where that like I come in and sit down with somebody that's remotely, but that's working on stuff in that regard. So I guess that's kind of a not as much like just the pure managing, but just the senior architect type role. But yeah.
And do you what sort of and in your mentoring role, what sort of advice do you give out to the new kid starting?
I haven't given a lot. That's a good question. I haven't done a lot of the advice to new kids. It's mostly been like code review type stuff. But if I were, I do have, or at least not as GDK. I've done a lot of things where I am talking to people that are new development though in general and wanting to learn programming. And one thing I run into a lot of people is that they're like, "Oh, I watched a bunch of videos on YouTube and I'm pretty excited. I think I'm learning a lot." And it's like, "Have you written any code yet?" Like, no, not yet. And I'm like, okay, that's like trying to learn how to ride a bicycle from reading a book. Until you are up there trying to balance it and things aren't working. And when I used to teach, I've done a few like boot camps, like learn to program boot camp type things. And one of the things I say in the boot camp is that I'm not going to be able to teach you everything you need to know, but what I want to do is give you like some of the pieces, right? And then in the future, you're going to learn, oh, I got to go figure this out, or this is how you figure this out, because you don't memorize everything. That's a misnomer in programming. But I always want to try to give people like a few easy things to do. And I want to give them something that I haven't told them how to do yet, right? That they're going to be like, wait, this doesn't work. And it's like, okay, figure it out, because programming is not just, banging your finger on the keyboard and making code come out. It's spending a lot of time like, this isn't working. Why isn't this working? What do I need to figure out? And that's so that's the biggest piece of advice I give people, is that programming isn't just about writing code. Your code spends most of its time broken, and you got to figure out why. And so, yeah.
I think, the other, I was going to say when you're at, okay, going back to when in the 90s again, there was, you had Dr. Dobbs, you had MSJ. I think those resources today aren't necessarily around where you can just read something and type it out and learn from that. And even in university, it's a bit like you could, I'm going to do the analogy of, when you are learning a computer class, the tutorials where you are doing, the additions in C or Pascal are like the, piano scales. They're things you have to do in order to understand it, rather than just jump in and write a PY game, shall we say. Something gets a little bit lost there.
Yeah. When I was first learning to program, we had I don't know what the magazine was, but we'd get a magazine that would have listings, and you would type it out because there was no download. You just type out the code.
Yeah.
And then you would.
I was there.
It didn't work, right? And you're like, why didn't it work? And you got to go through, oh, here's the problem. And the other thing was, especially on the Commodore, that you had so much of the stuff was this peeks and pokes, where it was like talking to the hardware. And so you're sending these machine codes, right, to the hardware. Yeah. And so your behavior would be completely off. And it's like, oh, that's because this number is just slightly different. So it wasn't like a syntax error that wouldn't compile or something like that. It would be that this number was off by 1, and now that's completely wrong. And so you'd go through and type that out and get it to work. And then once you got it to work, then you would try to figure out how to modify it.
Yeah.
But then the kicker often was, there was a number of times that we'd type it out and you just kept the computer on because you didn't have a way to save it. And you had kept it on for a while and played with it, and then eventually at some point you're like, okay, I want to do something else with the computer, and you rebooted and you lost all of everything you'd done. So that was a really crazy ephemeral time where you would create something and it would exist for a while and then boop, would be gone.
Yeah. What were so that would have been a challenge way back when. What about in your professional life? What were some of the challenges there, do you think?
One thing, actually, this is something I recently realized, is that I've always liked to understand why things work the way they do. And I think there's some importance to that. But I think that as the abstractions, that we're able to work at higher and higher levels of abstractions, I think that sometimes that my obsession with wanting to know the why has held me back from doing things I could have got done. Because at the end of the day, shipping is a really important feature. And so, for example, Bitcoin, when Bitcoin first came out, this is something I've been really interested in for a long time, is this idea of a decentralized currency that didn't depend on trusted third parties. And so when Bitcoin first came out, I was like, oh, that's really interesting, but I don't quite understand how it works. And I just kind of kept wanting to understand it better. And then when I finally understood it better, Bitcoin was worth, whatever it is, $500 a coin or whatever. And it was like, okay, it's not worth getting into it now. But when I first learned about it, if I got, I probably needed to either commit more time to it or just say, okay, I don't need to understand it. Let's just do this. I could have, retired.
Yeah, well, on the other hand, though, one would say, look, I don't know about your level of understanding needed, but, you have to, in that sort of space, do a little tiny bit of research to know what you're looking at.
Yeah.
I recently looked at some stuff to do with the blockchain, only on GitHub, looking at some code. And this is actually done, I think it's free Pascal, and it's actually quite, I wouldn't say it's super large, but you need to have an understanding though of smart contracts and everything as that goes along with it. So I don't think you could have just jumped into it and and did it.
Yeah, I do think that you need some level of understanding. And I've had a lot of friends, for example, that jumped on the GameStop stock.
Oh yeah.
A while back. Right at the end, they didn't understand. They just knew it was exciting, so they jumped in and lost money because they didn't understand why they were jumping in or
that one.
what the curve was. And so I do think it is important to have some level of understanding. And I think that desire to understand it more is important. But I think that sometimes it has held me back in that I've become too obsessed with understanding it and it becomes a hindrance. So it definitely needs to be somewhere in the middle. I think I too often go too far to trying to understand it. But other people don't go far enough, for sure.
Did that need to understand? Did it have any other effects on you, or was it just a minor hindrance? Shall we say?
I think probably a minor hindrance. It's just that there's been a lot of times that I've worked with people before that were very obsessed with shipping a product, right? The business side of it. And that's important. But I've been, and so it works good for me to work with somebody like that, because I'm like, what I want to understand it, right? And they're like, we need to ship. So we find the balance somewhere in the middle. But actually, so Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison is a great example of this, right? In that you're familiar with the battle between them, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So Tesla was pure science, right? He just wanted to make these scientific breakthroughs, understand things, unlock the secrets of the universe. Whereas Edison famously said that if there's no business need for it, right? If there's no way to make money off of it, then it's not worth pursuing. And so if you take a step back from that, right? So in one regard, it's like, Tesla or Edison was this terrible business person that had, didn't think of anything but making money. But if you take a step back from that and think about it, right, is that if there's nobody wants the results of it, right, then if somebody wants the results, then they're going to pay money for it. And if nobody wants the results, then is it making the world a better place? Maybe eventually, but in the short term, it's not. And so I think you need a little bit of both of Edison and Tesla, right? You need a little bit of, are people going to want this? Is this going to make people's lives better? As well as the, understanding it for the understanding's sake is also important, because sometimes it takes a couple iterations before you get to that beneficial area.
Just on that note about Tesla, and I'm going to say it may be symptomatic of, let's say, the landscape these days. Is it? And look, let's just say my understanding of development in America, shall we say, or in the US, is, I hazard to say, formed on Reddit, because that would be a bad thing to say. But there's this idea that that the developers are seen as, or viewed maybe as, they don't get much input into the decision making, of when things are done, and it's all top down driven, and it's money first, and you just have to do what you're told to do. Is that true or false? Do you think, first of all?
So I've worked at a number of different places and have talked to people at other places as well. I think there is I think it's certainly moving that way. So, for example, I've worked at places that have moved away from in-house developers to outsourced developers, where they would outsource the development. And what that does is it creates so first of all, that it represents this idea that the software development is the commodity, right? That the core of the business, the thing that makes the business run, is not the code. The code is just a product that they have somebody else build that they then resell. And so that represents so then once you do that, downgrades the importance of the value of what the developers are doing. But then it also creates that disconnect, right? In that the developer, especially if you're like hiring a development team, right? So then the company is interfacing with a product manager or project manager on the other side, right? And that project manager's job is to get this job done with as little expense as possible to meet the requirements. And so once you have that disconnect where you have these two project managers that are making the conversations, the developers have no input to the high level decisions at that point. And so that definitely does lead to like you described. I think though that that's not the rule. There are exceptions. I think a lot of times, especially in like medium to small companies, startups will have developers in-house that will be making a lot of input into the way things should be. But I think a lot of bigger companies definitely are moving away from that idea. Now, that being said, I just saw a talk from Cory Doctorow at DEF CON this last year, talking a lot about this idea that for the longest time, developers were key decision makers and key. And the example he gave is that managers would come and say, "Hey, we want to do this." And developers would be like, "That's not a good idea. Here's why." And the manager would be like, "Okay, well, let's do this." And like, "Okay." So then there'd be a collaboration,
a back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah. Now it's become developers have become commoditized to the point that that's not happening anymore, and we're seeing some things in technology falling apart as a result of that. Like the CloudStrike, honestly, the level of failure in that CloudStrike instance where they didn't have the testing and stuff, it's just mind-boggling. And that's not the only time that's happened. And so I think that's part of this thing where the people that have the technical understanding are being pushed further and further away from the decision making. And so he was talking about advocating for like technology unions to become a bigger thing. And I think that's probably a good idea that we're probably getting to that point now.
Yeah, because let's say for myself, shall we say, I have, let's just say, I'm just going to put it out there. I've got one thing, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and so when you want to do something to the best of your ability, and you know that what you're shipping may not be there, and then you're gonna hope and pray, I hope this is going to work. Did you ever get that sort of feeling?
Oh yeah. So I've been the project manager and stuff as well, and had to make the call of yes, it could be better. And I understand, the developers are saying, we could do this or we should do this. But at the same time, it needs to ship, right? I know that you can continue to polish it and it's just going to get shinier and shinier, but you got to, release it. I do also, I do think a lot of companies ship things that they plan to patch. They're like, this isn't going to work, but we'll patch it later. And I don't agree with that. Okay. I do think it should work out of the box, right? It may not have all the features, it may not have all the refinement we want, but it should work out of the box. And there shouldn't be a release with a planned, okay, we'll fix this bug. Great. Now, bug is a big word that means a lot of things to a lot of people, and some things that some people consider to be a showstopper bug, other people don't. So that's a tough one as well.
About
yes. Yep. Yeah. So shipping with bugs, I mean, I guess it's going to have bugs. That's just the reality. But is it going to have bugs that are going to? I don't think you should ship with bugs that are going to cause critical bugs, right?
Yeah.
They're going to cause problems for the end users, but that there certainly are things that you can improve and that you can still ship in that point.
Yeah, I guess the part of the issue here can be when a developer then takes on a personal responsibility for their code that produces the bug then, and what happens there? And you're the PM.
So
I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, by the way.
Yeah. No, I've been on both sides of that. I've been the developer and had the PM say, no, don't do this, Jim. We need to ship. And I'm like, no, I know we're close. I will get this. And
Mm.
I've gotten it before. I
Yeah.
came this close to losing my job, but
Okay.
um, uh, so I like to tell developers or anybody I work with that I want to hear, like what they have to say,
Yep.
and that's really important. And if they disagree with me, they should tell me they disagree with me. But then that it's my responsibility to take that information and make that decision, right? Even if they disagree with it, they
Mm.
need to accept that. And then I the other way around, if anybody I'm reporting to, I'll argue if they're wrong, and I'll say, I understand you're the boss, but if you're having a meeting with me, I'm going to tell you why I disagree with you. So yeah, when a developer takes personal, when they feel that level of connection to it, that it's hard to say um, that, but I think that when you have that level of where you can acknowledge what they're saying, right? And
Mm.
say, I understand your concerns with this. I understand that the connection you feel to this, and it does need to be fixed, but timing wise, this is what we're going to do.
Mm.
So it's hard, but I think, having good communication, which
Mm.
is important everywhere, is probably the secret to that. Is
Mm.
that kind of what you're asking there?
Partially.
Yeah.
I guess the soft skills these days are becoming more important, in IT.
Mhm.
And when, let's just say, soft skills way back when were probably not seen as so important. As long as you could write code, I'm not saying you got the job, but you got the job.
Mhm.
And when someone says, you got to fix this now, that can create undue stress on the individual then as well.
Mhm.
For me, look,
Yeah.
well, I guess what I'm leading towards is one of the things which sort of I'm not going to say broke me, but was the that constant okay, when you just get that there's a bug, shall we say, and you get in an email, and you can easily look back and say, well, they're just passing on their frustration from the customer, and it goes down the track, and it may magnify or whatever else, and
Right.
and who can you pass it on to? No one.
Okay.
And then and typically, no one really tells the developer, hey, thank you for writing such a good bit of code.
Yes. Yeah.
It's always, this code has a problem with it.
Yeah. So I worked for a while in tech support at a
Mm.
PC company, and I remember them saying, no one ever calls tech support to say, hey, my computer's working great, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, there were some soft skills that I learned doing that too, in that, when somebody calls in, they don't want to hear, oh yeah, we see this all the time, this is a known issue. Then they're
Yeah.
like, oh man, I bought a bad computer.
Mm.
But at the same time, they want to feel like whatever the issue they've discovered is important. And so it's the same
Mm.
thing with customers giving you bugs, right? Is that you don't want to say, yeah, we know, we'll get to it eventually. That tells them that you don't care.
Yep.
Um, so but at the same time, so it's tricky. Like you want to have your like list of known issues, because you don't want a
Mm.
customer to like spend a lot of time like, okay, here's how to reproduce this bug, only for you to say, oh, duplicate, we already know about that. You want them to know the bug exists, because otherwise you tell them they're wasting their time in reporting it.
Well,
But at the same time, if you have this huge backlog of bugs, then it looks like the software's
Mm.
unreliable.
Yeah. So,
So yeah, how to manage that to the developer, it's tough. Because you need to I mean, I guess that really should be the project managers should do a better job of insulating, right? The frustration of the customer shouldn't come through to the developers to feel
Yeah.
that disappointment. But at the same time, it's good to be direct and say, hey, this is a bug, needs to be fixed, it's important. So
what okay, other than soft skills and writing code, what else do you think is important to a developer today?
The business understanding the business aspect of it, and I don't know if that's a soft skill as much as like the legal, especially if you're a contractor, right? Understanding contracts, being able to read a contract and understand if it's a good contract or not, being able to know if the what you're being offered for your services is reasonable or not. And those are really, really important. Actually, I just watched a interview with Adam Savage from Mythbusters. And he was talking about how for his first season of Mythbusters was going really good, and they're like, "Oh, hey, this is great. We want to give you a percentage of the back end, residuals, and we're going to renegotiate your new contract for you." And he found out later, and he shared in his talk that there's always zero on the back end. That they do the accounting, so there's always zero back end on it. And he ended up getting a lawyer. Someone gave him advice to get a lawyer, and the advice he was told was that your lawyer or whoever you're going to hire is always going to screw you. They're always going to try and take advantage of you as best they can. So your goal is to get taken advantage of as little as possible, and that usually means finding a lawyer who's going to be right. Their motivations are not tied to you signing a bad contract, right? So anyway, so he said he got a lawyer and learn to read contracts. He's just got to read it, and then be able to push back on it. And I think that's important, is to know what your skills are worth, which is hard because I think a lot of times we don't know what our skills are worth, and then be able to read a contract and say, yeah, this isn't a good contract for me. I think those are important. Unless if you're working for somebody else, it's still good to know your rights as an employee and make sure you're being paid fairly, but it's going to be different than contract work, I suppose, to some degree.
What you're looking for? You drink?
What is
just water? No. So,
I drink a lot of water.
Yeah. Well, it's meant to be good for you, I'm told.
Yeah.
So, with how do you see the software development heading in the next few years, though, or then?
It's an interesting time, honestly. And interesting is not a good thing. Right? I mean, that used to be I heard that was a curse, is may you live in interesting times. So a funny story. A few years ago at the release of Tokyo, I was in Tokyo for the release event, and we had a press event, and I was doing a Q&A after the press event, and one of the reporters said, hey, is now a good time to be releasing a developer tool because AI is changing the landscape and pretty soon developers are going to be obsolete. And so, I mean, this was a few years ago, so not where we're at today. And so I told him, I said, when I got into computer programming back in the Commodore VIC-20 time, people were telling me, you don't want to be a computer programmer because computers should be programming themselves. And I said, well, someone's got to tell computers how to program themselves. And I think what we've seen is that the layer of abstraction keeps going up, right?
Yeah.
So the programming language is the prompt engineering, right? That's your programming. The new programming language is your prompt engineering, and the large language models are the compilers, right? Now, in Delphi, there's actually multiple levels of compilers in there, right, that are running behind the scenes. There's the linker and all this, stuff. Yes, I know that maybe it's oversimplification, but the point is that you're adding a new layer of abstraction that you need to be able to operate on both sides of
Mm.
with. And so I think it's important for programmers to know how to use large language models and use them effectively. And then also the biggest problem is going to be that the management doesn't have unrealistic expectations of large language models and thinking, I don't need someone that knows the program. You're right. Like anybody, I can type in a large language model. Look, there's code. Why doesn't this code work? Well, I did 90% of the work. You figure it out. And that's not realistic, right? So getting that level of education, that level of understanding to know that the large language model is another tool in the tool belt to generate code
If
is
the
the reality.
But if the abstraction goes higher, two thoughts come to mind. The first is the program's ability to actually understand what's happening underneath, and the need for the developer to, do I need to go through all that study if all I'm going to be doing is, for lack of a better word, going up another level, like, you know, how to write a linked list, how memory managers work, how a when I was at when I was at university, this is when by the way, so when I was at university, I saw a copy of Windows 2, I think it was, in one of the labs. But and I can't remember whether it was in assembler or C, on just a screen, having to, using math, obviously draw a circle. That was an assignment. Because you had to be able to know how to draw a pixel, then you learned how to do the math and etc. So as abstraction increases, does that make the code, doesn't that take away something from the programmer, or does it take away something?
Yes
Well,
and
not.
No. So it does. It makes it low. It lowers the barrier to entry. But you're going to run into situations. It's I've heard it called the law of leaky abstractions. Right? Is that every time you have this layer of abstraction, occasionally something leaks through. Now, an example that just happened last week. I had someone that had some code that was, they're getting a null reference exception, and it was occurring when a procedure, at the end of a procedure. So it wasn't recurring on a line of code, right? Here's the procedure. When a procedure goes to return back to the caller, null reference exception. And it's like, where is this coming from? And I was like, okay, what's happening is one of your local variables is getting tied to something that is being reference counted. And when it goes out of scope at the end of the routine, that's getting freed. But then the local variable that is not reference counted is now doesn't exist. And sure enough, that's what it was. We had to dig in a few levels deep. And so we're pretty quick able to find it. And so that is a great example of that shouldn't happen, right? you know the basics, and this is the way it works, but it usually works that way. But then occasionally something doesn't work, and being able to understand why that doesn't work is important, and actually a few months ago I was playing with floating point numbers just for fun. And
I saw the article.
And the not a number, there's different values. So there's actually quite a bit of values that are not a number. And there's one of them is a alerting not a number and a non-alert, a silent not a number. And so the idea is alerting not a number should notify that something's wrong. And so I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And so I played with it a little bit and discovered that when I returned an alerting not a number, it got turned back to a silent not a number. Like, is this a bug? And it turns out, nope, that's the way the CPU architecture works. And so I didn't know that that's the way CPU architecture worked. And so again, it's just like at this high level, but then I had to actually understand the way the registers works on the CPU to understand why that behavior was changing. And so you're always going to have that, right? When you're going to be working on, let's say you're working on a large language model and it's generating Python code, there's still going to be occasionally something's going to bubble up. It's going to leak. from the way the CPU does things. And if you don't understand that, then you're gonna waste your time or fix it wrong. I like to say that if you're reviewing somebody's code and you see a lot of application process messages and sleeps, they probably don't understand threading correctly, and they've been trying to fix a race condition in the wrong way. And I think that you have the same thing, is that if you don't understand why this is bubbling up from that lower level, you're going to fix it the wrong way, and it's just going to be a band-aid that's going to eventually fall off, and you're going to have a lot more trouble.
So I guess what I'm hearing you say is that the programmers still need to have the same level of understanding, and the way though that they develop the software may change a little.
Yeah. Yes, but I would also say that you can consider team dynamics as well, in that if you can have the barrier to entry is lower, so you can bring on developers that maybe are able to, work at the large language model level, but then need to have senior developers on the team as well that are able to, that when they're like, this is weird, they can talk to the more senior developer who can say, yeah, that's what's going on, is this here. And then that collaboration, is how those newer developers are going to learn. So yes, you still need to have developers on your team that understand all the way down to the middle, but the people are able to come on quicker and contribute quicker than they could in the past. But you need to have that collaboration, and that's a really important thing as well. And I feel like a lot of companies are going away from that, the valuing the person, right? They're more valuing the code,
end
right?
result.
Yeah, the end results. Which I just saw this paper by what's his name? Peter Nar? Yeah. Make sure I got this right. Yes, Peter Nar. Yeah, Peter Naur. He was the N in BNF notation. So BNF notation is what we use to describe syntax. So he wrote this paper called Programming as Theory Building, and it was written back in '85. And the paper makes the argument, and I think a good argument, that the code is not the value, the valuable outcome, or it's not the value that's produced in software development is not the code. The value that's produced in software development is the brains of the programmers.
Okay. Yeah.
And this is why we see so often that a company will say, get acquired and say, we've got this really valuable IP. Oh, we don't need all these really expensive developers that developed it. We'll hire some other developers to come in and fix it. And it falls apart over time and ends up getting rewritten. Classic example, Skype was the de facto standard for making online audio and video calls. Voice over IP was Skype. There was nothing else. Microsoft bought it, and they tried to integrate it into the other products, and it completely fell apart. And then they completely dropped the ball. And and so I think that's part of that same thing, is this idea that that the code is the value. It's not. It's the programmers that understand the code. That is where the value is at. And so yeah, that's so going back to the ideas that you do need to, the programmer needs to understand all of it, but they don't need to right away. But the idea is that over time, right, the experienced programmer is going to have better understanding of it.
Yeah. What is there anything with that? What would you? I'm going off on a big tangent now. What would you tell if your younger self was going to go into software development? What would you tell that person?
I think I would try to give him a better understanding of the value in what he was delivering, right? In that it was, to be expect better pay,
Yeah.
and also to one of the things I realize now is that when you're young, you think I'm just going to work 60 hours a week every week till I die, and the reality is that's not what you're going to do, right? At some point, you're going to start to slow down a little bit. Your brain's not going to be as sharp as it was when you were 20. So save more for the future, but also don't. I think that we push ourselves too hard early on as well. I think you need to
Okay.
enjoy life as you go more. Also. So
Mm.
yeah, that would, I think, and I probably also would say, so that's kind of more philosophical, soft skills. But I think, ship often is also probably some good advice, right? In that you need to. There's a lot of projects I wrote that I never shared with anybody. That probably should have, and probably would have been helpful to a lot of people, but. Whether I was selling it or making it open source would have been good, right? Getting that collaborative feedback with others and sharing it and being okay with making mistakes and finding out, oh, you did that wrong. Well, now I know,
Making a mistake, was that is that what stopped you from hang on? So you didn't, let's say, ship some products per chance, and so is it the potential to make a mistake is what stopped you, or?
There was a lot of that polishing it, right? When it wasn't done, and I didn't want to share it until it was done. But then it never, it just fell away before it was done, right? I never actually went anywhere. Was part of it. But there is it's what the 80-20, right? Is that you can get 80% of the functionality and 20% of the effort.
Yep,
But then
I know that one.
in order to make it something that somebody else could make sense of, right? There's a pretty good chunk that you need to do beyond once you've made that, right? I've made a proof of concept. Hey, this is cool. If I want to share it with somebody, there's a pretty good chunk that you need to do there. So I think that doing that, like integration work, for lack of a better term, but that where you're going to do the work to make what you have usable earlier on, instead of waiting till you have all your functionality done and then make it usable, is a good skill to have, in that more of that iterative approach to things instead of the I guess waterfall top-down approach.
Yeah. So when you said earlier about working 60 hours a week, I'm assuming that's not a number you just picked out of the air. Is that what you were doing, or?
Oh, there were times I was definitely doing 60 hours or more a week. Yeah. Maybe up to 80.
Yeah. What can I ask? What effect that had on you? Or not?
No, I'm just trying to quantify it. That's fine. I love what I do, and so it's easy for me to do that, and it's even and I still frequently work a ridiculous amount of hours because I just get obsessed about something and I have to see it through. But it does. So there was part of it that definitely was a satisfaction, right? In that I was doing good work, right? And I felt like I was, I felt like I was doing good work, and so there was a satisfaction to that. But it also over time became aware of just the that it does wear you down mentally. You don't feel it at first, but over time, I became more and more aware of this. Like there was something that's like, this isn't sustainable, and so I think that there is. I love what I do, and I,
Yeah.
like I said, there's still times I do spend crazy amount of time working on stuff, but it needs to be balanced, right?
Mm,
So an occasional 60 hours, okay, that's fine, but don't do 60 hours every week, right?
yeah.
You need, and if you're doing 60 hours one week, have a week where you're only doing 20. Even if all you do is go outside,
Mm,
with those extra hours,
yeah.
it does
Look,
make you a better person.
well, okay. Well, other than the fact that spending hours outdoors is good for you, I think there's a few in my own story. I was working from home,
Mhm.
and because the company was based in the US and they had offices in the UK, etc. And I'll put aside the fact you can't escape from your work, but when you start to do those sorts of hours, shall we say, other changes happen, like your social circle can become smaller.
Mhm.
I don't know if this happened to you, but how do you talk about an IT problem with your partner or your family? Um, you know, you get to a point where you might say, "What's the point?"
Yep. No. And actually, I've worked from home quite a bit the last, I think pretty much last 15 years. I've been full time from home when not
Yeah.
traveling,
Mm,
and that having somebody to collaborate with is important. I mean, you can do some of that, via a call like we are.
yeah.
And I actually, that's one thing that I like about GDK is that I'm working with a bunch of Delphi experts that are passionate about it as I am, so that it's
Mm,
easier to do that sort of thing.
mm,
Um, but yeah, the uh, working from home, yeah, it kind of consumes. It's easy for that just to consume everything, but then also, have you heard of I've heard it called rubber duck or teddy bear debugging, where the idea is that you describe what's going on to an
okay.
inanimate object.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've I've actually had really good luck explaining it to my kids, and then like in the process, they're like, "Wait, doesn't make any sense." I'm like, "Oh, actually, you're right. That doesn't make any sense. Hold on." So you can, just explain it to anybody if they're willing to listen to you. That's sometimes the hard part, right? Is there get someone that's willing to listen to you. But if nothing else, explain it to a teddy bear, and that can help you
Mm.
debug it.
I don't know who I was listening to, but it was a podcast. It was a psychology one, and they said, "What do you do when your patient or your client doesn't turn up?" And he says, "Well, I do psychology with myself. I put two chairs down and I take both roles." So I think it was a half flippant answer, but it's one of those things where if you got no one to talk to, uh,
Well, and I've done that too when I've had somebody that I've gotten to know that I've gone to for advice. And if it's like, okay, I probably should go talk to them. You need some help, guidance here. I've been able to
mm,
have that conversation in my mind of like, well, this is probably what they'd say. Okay, well, that's what I would say. Okay, all right, all right, okay, that makes sense. And
yeah,
so, um, and I've heard people say that you can do that by reading like lots of biographies and stuff about big, decision makers and uh, thought leaders, influencers in the history, right?
mm,
Understanding the way they thought about things, you can then be able to
mm,
have those conversations with people that you would never be able to have the conversation with just based
mm,
on what they know. And I guess you could do that with a large language model, right? Go to it and say, "Hey, you're Nikola Tesla, right? I want to talk to you about this."
mm.
Have
But
you I read his biography, by the way, Nikola Tesla. Oh
yeah,
man, that guy was.
what's the word? One word.
um, I feel like he wasn't from Earth.
Okay.
It wasn't
But
just that he was like
mm,
uh, so far ahead of everybody else, genius, but just like
mm,
some of the stuff he talked about was just like so um, out of this world. Yeah.
yeah. Do you think though that if you're do your developers also work from home, or do they all go meet at the office?
So GDK, we have three offices. Yeah, three offices. I have a co-working space that I
Yeah.
work from a lot, but as well. So most of them, probably about I would say 3/4 of them probably work from an office. But we
Okay.
do have company days, which we just got back from, where
Mm.
we get once a year, everybody from all the offices get together in one place to a little bit of like this is where the company's going, and a lot of getting to know each other and doing stuff,
Yeah.
interacting, team building type
Okay.
exercises.
Building
Which,
connections.
yes, it's fantastic. And then and it's a chance to get to when you talk to somebody face to face, then you're like, okay, I can talk to you online
Mm.
easier now. And then we
Mm.
do we call them Vivid Days once a month, I think it is. That is uh, everybody gets a day to do their own work on their own projects or their own
Okay.
explore something or get some training on something, read a book or whatever. And then
Yep.
we do days or people take turns then sharing what they've learned during Vivid Days or just in general
Mm.
with the rest of the
Mm.
team as well. It's knowledge sharing sessions. And so yeah, even though you're some of them might be remote, most of them aren't remote, but those things there really help a
Mm.
lot in the collaborative, interactive
Mm.
spirit of software development.
Mm. So I was going to ask, I was going to be smart and say, but if you're spending 60 hours a week, you don't have time to read a book either. Um,
Yeah. No. Well,
but
luckily I don't
do,
spend 60 hours a week all the time anymore. So
no, no. Do you find though that up, let's say, it sounds like what you are doing in your company sounds a little bit unique. Is that true, or that common now? For having all these ways for developers to build relationships, shall we say?
I um I feel like at least in the US it's unique. Most places in the US I see are really just see developers as commodities, and to
Mm.
see that GDK really invests in like the developers long term, I think is fairly
Mm.
unique. It may be more common in Europe, but
Mm.
I don't know in that capacity. But I do think so. It's interesting because a lot of companies are devaluing developers and outsourcing them, right, to
Mm.
consultants.
Yeah.
So GDK is a consulting company, but we're a consulting company that actually values our developers, and so that's kind
Well,
of an interesting catch-22, if you will. That that we're both on the side of being the consulting company that comes in for people that don't see the value of having developers in house,
mm.
but we do actually value our developers. So that means that I
I,
feel like we deliver a good quality result to our customers, and
I think that what you're saying though also really is in valuing your developer. Well, you want your developers to stay, don't you? I mean, if you're a good
yes,
developer, you don't want them to go somewhere else.
right.
Um, and if you can build relationships, then it becomes easier for person A to bring up a problem with person B, software or otherwise.
Mhm.
So it sounds like a good thing, that your business is doing to, um, dare I say, look after the individual.
Yep. Well, and then it also gives us the ability. We have like some projects that we work on for a little while and then don't work on and then come back and work on it again in the future. And so having these developers that stay with the company, right? Then it's like, oh, well, so and so worked on this before. We'll bring them back and work on it again and again because that theory building idea, right? They
Mm.
understand the code, right? That code is the expression, or they were able to read it and understand it and absorb that abstraction, and so then they're able to then bring it back up to their head quicker and make the changes quicker and better support it. And
Mm.
that's that goes back to the greenfield development, right? The idea that so many places are like so many developers would rather rewrite code than maintain code, because yes, it's easier than trying to understand it.
Yeah, yuck, I don't, that code looks horrid. Whether it's true or not is another matter, you know. So do you think then that developers these days are I don't know if confidence is the right word, but when if they do have a problem, are they likely to bring it up these days to their boss, or to you, or let's say to you if you're working with someone?
I would say that at least the ones I'm working with at GDK are good about that. And I know that I've talked to Marco and Keys about it a bit, and they said that is one of the things that they value a lot, is that this idea of feedback, and that they do sometimes have developers that aren't used to that, and they feel like, oh my goodness, I've gotten feedback, they're going to let me go. And it's like, no. You know, we want to give you feedback so you can be better and stay with us, right? And so I think that that's good, and some people certainly are not used to that, but definitely I value that. I think that I want people to give me feedback, and vice versa. Saying that though, tact is important.
It helps. Did they look with that? Did they ever? One of the things, like I said, I've been skipping around it to a degree here. One of the things that I have learned in my journey, shall we say, is the importance of communication, where you know, and I don't know, and probably the easiest way to do it is to frame it in terms of I, you know, rather than you, because, you know, when you look at it from that angle, the person who you're talking to won't then get defensive about, you know, what they're doing, you know, that rather than, you know, you're the problem, you got to fix it or whatever else. If you can say, well, you know, well, what I'm seeing here is, you know, ... You know, the way that you can, the way that you can, the tact, as you said, put it, the way you present your case, you know, can make a big difference to how that gets interpreted.
Yeah, I like to think about, and this applies to programming as well, but the model of communication, right? That, you know, the customer comes to you and they're like, I need a program that does this, and so you're like, okay, and you know, you take that, and you're like, okay, how am I going to accomplish this? And you build this model in your brain, and then you try to express that through code, and it's not going to be exactly right. There's always some places you're like, the customer said this, like, this is a whole lot easier. I could do this, but that's going to take a lot more time. So maybe this is okay, right? So there's always these places you're trying to adjust the model as you go through the layers, right? And so then you express it to the computer. The computer's like, syntax error or whatever, and you're like, oh, I got to fix this. And so again, you're making changes to it, and then the customer sees it, and then they're trying to then apply it to the model they originally had. But at each point, those changes happen. So it's the same thing in communicating with somebody, right? Is that I have a thought, an idea in my head that I want to share with somebody, but language is imprecise, right? My spoken language, I can't use exactly the words I want to use, and then and then those words are traveling to you, and there's other noise, there's other things happening, so you don't always hear exactly what I said, right? But then you take those words and then you apply your understanding of those words, your experiences and stuff like that, and so then the model in your brain is going to be completely different than what was in my brain when you consider all those layers it goes through. And so thinking about that, you know, both from the programming and from the communication point of view, I think is really important.
That's almost something that you would have learned in, I think, counseling, because they say what you think versus what you speak can be different, versus how it gets picked up by the ear and processed and then returned back. I think there's about 6 or 7 different ways it can get screwed up.
Yeah.
There also, with what you're saying about that, forming that opinion, I had a customer once who we were working on a rostering system to interact with their phone system, where we had to pull data down from somewhere and, you know, manipulate it into another database. Anyway, some of the cases, in the program were failing, and I brought this up with the customer, and I kid you not, they said, well, I didn't want to tell you about that part of it because I didn't think you'd be able to do it. Thinking, what? It would have helped,
Yep.
because I'm thinking, where's the fault in my code here? And it wasn't.
Well, the thinking about that, like it's I've when I was with the Embarcadero and then other companies as well. I've done a lot of work with people internationally, and so I have to think about, like, if somebody's not a native English speaker, or even, you're a native English speaker, but you're going to have different definitions of words from a different country,
Yeah.
right? And so thinking about, like, just some of the different cultural influences and impacts on these things, and there are certain cultures that are more direct or more indirect than I'm used to, right? And so understanding some of those things and some of the ways they can play into the communication is really, really important. And the tricky thing is I think I always want to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? But at the same time, I know that you got to be careful that if you give somebody too much slack, they're gonna, not get anything done. So it's you got to balance that out, right? And how do I give them the benefit of the doubt? How do I be as accommodating as possible, but still reach the goal I need to reach, right?
I got one more question, and then I have to go to another place. And I don't think I really got to one of the. One day I would like to talk about mental health with you. Maybe the next one. But how do you think that people, developers, shall we say, Delphi developers, how can they stay current in the changing world?
That's a good one. So I've done a lot of interviewing, like technical interviewing to hire developers, and we always like to say we need someone with 10 years of experience. And I discovered pretty quickly that there's a lot of people that have been programming for 10 years, but they repeated the first year over and over and over 10 times. That they never got beyond a certain level of experience, skill. And so I would say that interestingly, in that our audience that's listening to this is doing the things already that one of some things already in that, going out and looking for ways to learn and to expand yourself, right? But then I would also say that learn other programming languages. And I know that's maybe sacrilegious,
No.
but especially looking at ways you could integrate other languages with Delphi. So that's one of the things I love about Delphi is it's really easy to integrate with other things. There's a good Python bridge, there's a Lua bridge, there's a JavaScript bridge, there's C# bridges, there's Java bridges. So go learn one of these other languages, see some of the things, pros and cons of it, some of the ways it does things differently, and some of that maybe you might bring back and it might change and influence the way you write code in Delphi. Hopefully in a good way. But also it helps you to see, to understand things from a different point of view, and maybe understand.
You might also appreciate what you have.
Yeah, appreciate what you have. Yeah, and then but then when you're able to, so I've talked to people a lot. They're like, "Oh, Delphi is great because programming language X is terrible." And it's like, okay, first of all, saying it's only great because everything else is terrible doesn't say anything good about Delphi. But also, frequently I hear people say, "Oh, well, C# not compiled, so it's always slower than Delphi." Okay, so yes, actually C# technically does have a compiler, and technically, yes, compilation does usually mean faster, but there's a lot of situations where C# can be faster than Delphi. And so if nothing else, learning enough about C# to be able to intelligently tell somebody exactly why Delphi is better, that's, if nothing else, that's a good reason to learn more about C#, right? So you can tell people why C# is terrible. But or not as good as Delphi. So yeah, I think there's a lot of advantage to that. There's the Pragmatic Programmer just did the 40th anniversary edition book. Really good book. It talks a lot about a lot of that, learning other languages and stuff. And but yeah, I think trying to learn other languages, push yourself to do things that you don't normally do in your day-to-day job. Look at the stack, right? If you're always been putting components on the form, make a component from scratch. Pretty amazing stuff what you can do with that. If you've made components, make an IDE add-in, right? You know, go beyond where you're normally doing stuff and try and understand that. Try and understand the way the memory manager works. Look at the source code for memory manager. FastMM is open source. Swap to FastMM5. You know, there's a few things you can do, but just trying to, you know, look at the corners and the edges of the world you live in programming, and poke at them and see which ones you can push, expand out. And if you go out there and say, you know what, that's not for me, that's fine. Come back to where you're at. But now you know you don't want to go that direction.
Look, it's always look, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I would pick up from, say, another language, you know, off the top of my head. But I can tell you one thing, though. I jumped for joy when Delphi introduced the inline variables, you know. You know, so, and I'm not saying I wouldn't have, you know, you can find things in, look, actually, one thing you can do probably, you can find things in, I know, here's one, actually. If you learn another, you know, if there is something in another language, you can, and you need to use it in Delphi, and you understand the language, you have a better chance of porting it if you needed to. If for no other reason than that, one of the things, you know, that I would find is that the lots of, you know, let's say third-party tools, you know, they'd have a Java interface, a Python interface, or whatever. Pascal, you know, so what do? You know, so by learning another language, though, you have a better chance of, well, how can I make it work now? And like I said, you know, the skills that you pick up in any language, you know, it's a bit like, well, first of all, one of the things I would say is that you can't be judgmental about something unless you've tried it. I would say, go for the next step. Next thing I would say is that whether it's a programming language or a religion, they all have their good and bad parts to them. What you want to do is to try and, let's say, pick the best of both worlds or all worlds. And, you know, if nothing else, it makes you a more rounded or better programmer, I would hope.
Yeah. And you know, it might not be that there's a language feature that you are going to discover is beautiful. Again, that's the interesting thing about programming languages, right? Is technically, if it's a Turing complete programming language, which all programming languages are, then you can do everything in any language. But sometimes there's things you learn about the paradigms or the models of other languages that you're like, oh, you know, that's an interesting idea, right? And so it might be just a different way of thinking about it, or a different way of approaching things, but still just using regular language features that might be make you a better Delphi programmer.
And I would go one step further and say, if there was the one perfect language, then there'll be no need for the rest, would there?
Yep, we would have stopped at Delphi.
Which version?
Oh gosh. Yeah, exactly. If it was perfect, it wouldn't have new versions, would we? You know, Delphi 7 was the interesting thing about Delphi 7 is that it had two things going for it, right? Is that it was really mostly just an improvement on Delphi 6. There wasn't a lot of new features in Delphi 7, but also because it was right before the new IDE in Delphi 8 that changed everything, it kind of became a rose-colored looking back on it. But oh gosh, I don't know. I don't know if I could pick a favorite because there's so many great things. What's that? Yeah, exactly. Because
not
like,
allowed.
oh well, Unicode was great, but it's like, oh, but it first came out, there were some issues, but it got better.
Yeah.
64-bit. Oh, but I love the fact you can do Android. Oh, now we have inline variables.
Well, yeah. Look, actually, that's a couple. Thank you very much for chatting with me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
I hope you liked it enough that we may do another one in
Absolutely
a little while. And if I'm not saying it will replace the podcast you used to do, but like I said, we'll keep chatting and see when we can do another one. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.